By Sunday morning, the clip had been shared 43,000 times. I found out when my phone stopped loading. I was 31 weeks pregnant, sitting in the kitchen of our house at 6:47 in the morning, and the notification count on my screen was a number I'd never seen attached to anything with my name on it. Someone had posted 8 seconds of video from my baby shower. 8 seconds. My mother-in-law was standing at the front of the room, champagne glass raised, 35 people watching, the handmade blanket my grandmother had sewn still in the gift bag at her feet where she'd set it after opening it and saying, "How sweet, something homemade," in that specific tone that makes 2 words carry the weight of an insult. And then her voice, caught perfectly on camera, in front of my mother, my sister, my closest friends, my neighbors, and the women from her church she'd invited without telling us, "I just hope the baby takes after Daniel." 8 seconds. 43,000 shares, and my face in the corner of the frame, going very still. I had not set up that camera. I had not posted the clip. I had not planned any of this. But I had to decide by Monday morning what I was going to do about it. Before I tell you what I decided, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you are right now. Now let me take you back 8 months to the dinner where I first understood what I was dealing with. My name is Ellie. I'm 32 years old. I'm going to tell you about my mother-in-law the way I tell it to someone sitting across from me, honestly, without drama, without exaggeration, because the truth doesn't need either of those things. Barbara Porter is 63 years old. She lives 20 minutes from us in the same town where Daniel grew up. She is organized, well-dressed, and in possession of a social calendar that would exhaust most people half her age. She chairs 2 committees at her church. She hosts a book club that has met without interruption for 11 years. She sends birthday cards, thank you notes, and occasional clippings from local newspapers to people she thinks might find them relevant. She is, by every visible measure, a woman who has her life together. What she is not, and what I understood approximately 6 months into my relationship with Daniel, is someone who shares. Daniel is her only child. That's the context that explains everything else, without excusing any of it. When Daniel and I started dating, 3 years ago, introduced by a mutual friend at a dinner party, the kind of night where you meet someone and know within an hour that you're going to talk about this night for a long time, he was 31, and I was 29. We were both grown adults with careers and apartments, and the specific self-knowledge that comes from having been wrong about relationships before and learned from it. What we were not was naive. We went slowly. We talked about the important things early. We were honest. The first time I met, Barbara was at a Sunday dinner at her house. Daniel had told me she was excited to meet me, which I later understood meant she was ready to evaluate me. The house was immaculate. The meal was excellent. Barbara asked me questions about my work. I'm a graphic designer, freelance, with the kind of polite interest that is actually measuring something else. She asked about my family, where I grew up, whether my parents were still together. She asked about my apartment in a way that made me understand she had already formed an opinion about it. She was warm. She was engaged. She laughed at the right moments. And when Daniel and I washed up after dinner while Barbara sat at the table with her coffee, I heard her say to the empty room, to no one, or to the house, or to some internal audience she maintained, "She seems fine." Fine. Not mean. Not a threat. Not even fully unkind. Just fine. I filed it away. The next year contained versions of that dynamic at every significant occasion. Daniel's birthday, which Barbara had organized for 30 years and was not interested in reorganizing. Thanksgiving at her table, where the seating, the menu, and the conversation topics were arranged in advance. Christmas, where the gift-giving order was established, and anyone who deviated from it created a disruption she absorbed with visible effort. I was not unwelcome. I was managed. Looking back now, there were signs of what was underneath the management. The way she referred to Daniel's previous girlfriend, a woman he'd dated for 2 years before me, with a warmth and specificity that seemed designed to inform me of the standard. Carolyn was such a natural in the kitchen. Carolyn's family has that place in Vermont you'd love, Daniel. The way she found opportunities when Daniel wasn't in earshot was to ask me questions that were actually statements about my limitations. "Do you think you'll keep working after the baby? It's so hard to do both well." The way she said the baby, never your baby or my grandchild. The possessive is always somewhere else. When we told her I was pregnant, 11 weeks along, in her kitchen on a Saturday afternoon, Barbara's face did something that I watched very carefully. It moved through 3 expressions in about 4 seconds. The first was surprise. Real surprise, which told me Daniel hadn't been warning her that the conversation was coming. The second was something that flickered through and disappeared too fast for me to name it cleanly. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't quite grief. It was the expression of someone who has just understood that a plan, their plan, the one they'd been running quietly, had changed in a way they couldn't control. The third was a smile. Wide, warm, practiced. How wonderful, she said. When are you due? That was the performance. The reality I understood in that car ride home, while Daniel talked happily about names and rooms and what his parents would think, was that Barbara had been hoping for a different version of this story. One where she remained the most important woman in Daniel's life a little longer. One where the arrival of a baby, a fact that was real and permanent and could not be managed away, had not yet happened. It had happened. And she had approximately 8 months to decide what she was going to do with that. The baby shower was planned for a Saturday in April. My best friend, June, organized it. 35 guests. My friends, my sister Beth, my mother Carol, a few of Daniel's colleagues' wives, and Barbara's additions. I'll get to those. I arrived at the venue, a private room at a restaurant June had rented, at 11 in the morning. The tables were set with pale yellow linen and small arrangements of flowers I'd chosen from a photo June had sent me the week before. Everything was exactly what we'd planned. I walked in and felt the particular relief of something looking the way you imagined it. And then Barbara arrived 20 minutes later with 7 women I had never seen before. I recognized the look on June's face when she came to find me near the food table. She said, "Ellie, Barbara brought guests." I said, "How many?" 7. I counted the chairs. The room was set for 35. We now had 42 people. June said, "She said she mentioned it to Daniel." I said, "She didn't." I knew she hadn't because I'd had a very specific conversation with Daniel the week before in which I'd confirmed the guest list, and Barbara's name had been on it alone. I found Barbara near the gift table, introducing her guest to my aunt. I said, "Barbara, I wasn't expecting additional guests." She turned with a smile. "Oh, these are my book club friends and a few from church. They've been so excited about the baby. I hope you don't mind." The way she said, "I hope you don't mind," with the certainty of someone who has already decided you won't. I said, "We'll need to find some extra chairs." She said, "I already asked the manager. It's all sorted." She had called ahead. She had planned this. I went to find June. I went to find the extra chairs. I helped set them up while I was 7 months pregnant at my own baby shower, because that's what you do when the alternative is making a scene that would ruin the morning for 35 people who had come to celebrate something real. I should have seen it sooner. But I didn't see yet what she was planning for the toast. I want to tell you what I've pieced together since the shower, because the picture I have now is much fuller than the one I had at the time. Barbara did not improvise at my baby shower. She prepared. I know this because 3 people told me things in the weeks after, not dramatically, not in a coordinated disclosure, but the way information surfaces in small towns when something public has happened, and people feel the need to account for themselves. The first, my neighbor Patricia, who was also in Barbara's book club. She called me 2 weeks after the shower and said, "Ellie, I want to apologize for being there that day. I didn't know what Barbara was planning when she invited us. I thought it was a friendly thing." I said, "What did you know?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "In the 2 weeks before the shower, Barbara talked about you at book club." Not cruelly. She was careful about that. But she said things. That you were young for your age. That she'd had some concerns about whether you and Daniel were ready. That she thought the pregnancy had moved things faster than was ideal. I sat with that. She said, she framed it as worry. As a concerned future grandmother. But looking back, she was building something. A consensus. So that when something happened, the people around her would already be partially prepared. That wasn't the worst part. The second disclosure came from my sister-in-law. Daniel's cousin's wife, a woman named Pam, who'd been at the shower. She texted me 10 days after and said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you before." I called her back immediately. She said, "Barbara spoke to my husband, Paul, 3 weeks before the shower. She told him she was worried about the marriage, that she thought you and Daniel had rushed into things, that she was concerned about she used the phrase, your capacity for family life. Your capacity for family life. 3 weeks before the shower." I said, "What did Paul say?" Pam said, "He told her to stay out of it. He called Daniel after. Daniel told him Barbara was just nervous about becoming a grandmother." I didn't say anything. Pam said, "Ellie, I'm sorry. We should have told you." The third thing I found out came from my own mother. Carol had driven 4 hours to be at the shower. She'd sat 2 tables from Barbara all morning. After the toast, I'll tell you about the toast. My mother had simply walked out of the room and stood in the parking lot in the April cold for 15 minutes. When I called her that night, she told me what she'd been replaying in her mind. She said, "At one point before the toasts, I went to the restroom. Barbara was in the hallway near the restroom door on her phone. I heard her say, 'I'm going to say something today. I've been quiet long enough. She didn't see me. I didn't say anything. Mom said, I thought she meant a toast. A proper grandmother toast. I went back to my seat. She should have told me. I understand why she didn't. She didn't know what she'd heard. She thought it was ordinary. It wasn't ordinary. Barbara had been building toward that toast for weeks. The book club, Paul's conversation, and the 7 uninvited guests who were already primed to hear her version of who I was. The toast was the performance. The guests were the audience she'd assembled. In June's camera, the small black device June had clipped to the top shelf of the decorative bookcase at the back of the room, angled to capture the whole space as a memory keepsake, was the thing nobody had planned for, including me. June called me Saturday evening, 4 hours after the shower ended. Her voice was careful, not upset. The particular care of someone who has seen something and is deciding how to say it. She said. Ellie, I need to tell you about the camera. I said, what camera? She said, I set up a small camera on the bookshelf. For the memory. I do it for every shower I plan. I was going to make you a video, the setup, the guests arriving, the gifts, a keepsake. I said, okay. She said, it recorded everything, including the toast. I said, does it have audio? She said, yes. I said, and you haven't posted it anywhere? She said, no. But Ellie, I need you to see it before I do anything. She sent me the file 30 minutes later. I sat alone in our bedroom, Daniel downstairs, and I opened it on my laptop. I watched 44 minutes of a baby shower that had started beautifully. The tables, the flowers. The guests are arriving. My mother is hugging me at the door. June laughed at something my sister said. And then, at the 41st minute, Barbara was standing at the front of the room, champagne glass raised. I watched what came next once. Then I closed the laptop. And I sat for a long time in the dark of our bedroom, thinking about what it means when someone has been building something for months, and you've seen the bricks without seeing the wall. I need to tell you what Barbara said. Not all of it. The toast ran 4 minutes, which is long for a toast and very long for what it actually was. She started with congratulations. Genuine enough. She talked about Daniel as a child, which was fine. She talked about how much she looked forward to becoming a grandmother, which was also fine. And then she turned toward me. She said she wanted to say a few words about family, about what it means to raise a child well, about the values the Porter family had always held. The room was quiet. 35 people plus her 7 guests. She said she had some concerns she'd been sitting with. She felt as the baby's grandmother, it was her responsibility to name them. That she had noticed, in the past year, that Ellie, and she used my name, once, like a labeled package, had some growing to do before she'd be ready for what was coming. She mentioned my career. Freelance work, she said, with a small, careful pause, wasn't exactly stable. She mentioned that I hadn't been raised with the kind of structure she felt children needed. She mentioned that she had prayed about this. And then she raised her glass and said, I just hope the baby takes after Daniel. Smiled. Drank. And looked around the room as though she expected applause. My mother was at the back of the room. She walked out without a word. My sister Beth looked at me from across the table with the expression of someone trying to determine whether I'm about to collapse or not. I was not. I picked up my water glass. I took a sip. I set it down. I said, thank you, Barbara. And I smiled. Not because I was fine, but because the room was full of people I cared about, and the rest of the shower was going to happen regardless. And I had made a decision in the moment that screaming was not going to serve me, or my baby, or the 44 minutes of lovely footage that already existed on June's camera before the toast happened. After the shower, I thanked every guest individually. I held every gift. I smiled at Barbara's book club friends, who left with the pinched expressions of people who were not sure they'd been at what they expected. In the car on the way home, Daniel asked how I thought it went. I said, your mother gave an interesting toast. He said, she can be a lot. You know how she is. I said, I do. I did not say anything else. Because Daniel's phrase, you know how she is, told me something important. He had been using that phrase as a management tool for years. She means well. She's just anxious. She's always been like this with people I date. He had been absorbing Barbara's behavior by making it smaller, familiar, normal. The footage was not normal, and I needed him to understand the difference between how she is and what she had actually done. Before I could show it to him, I needed to think clearly. Have you ever been in a room while someone was dismantling your reputation, quietly, in front of an audience, and had to decide in real time whether to respond or hold? If you have, Drop a fire in the comments, because I want to know I'm not alone in that room. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now. What happens with that footage changes everything. Sunday morning, I woke up early and looked at my phone. June had sent it at 6:42. Ellie, call me. I called. She said, someone from my private group shared the clip publicly. I don't know who. I just checked, and it has 14,000 views. I sat up in bed. Daniel was still asleep. I said, which clip? The toast, she said. 8 seconds. The last line in your face. By the time Daniel woke up at 8:15, it had 31,000 views. By 9 o'clock, 43,000. I showed Daniel the clip on my phone at 9:17. I didn't say anything while he watched it. I just held the phone so he could see. I watched his face while he watched it. He watched it twice. Then he put the phone down on the kitchen table. He said, I didn't know she was going to say that. I said, I know. He said, Ellie, I said, I'm going to ask you one question and I need you to think before you answer. He looked at me. I said, is this how she is? Or is this what she did? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, it's what she did. That was the first time he'd made that distinction. I said, then we need to talk about what comes next, together. He nodded. Barbara called at 9:44. Daniel let it go to voicemail. The message was 3 minutes long. I heard it through the phone speaker, played on his lap, his face still. She said she was calling because she'd seen that something had been posted online. A friend had sent it to her, and she wanted to explain the context. She said the toast had been misunderstood, that she'd meant it as a loving hope for the baby's future, that she'd said it with affection, not malice. She said she hoped Ellie could hear that and move past it. She used my name twice in 3 minutes, both times like a label on a package. Daniel played it again, alone in the kitchen while I was in the next room. Then he came to find me and said, I need to call her back. I said, okay. He said, do you want to be there? I thought about it. I said, yes. Barbara answered on the first ring. Daniel put the phone on speaker. He said, Mom, I watched the clip. She said, it's been taken out of context. He said, I watched the full recording, Mom. June captured the whole shower. A pause. She said, Daniel, I was expressing love for my grandchild. He said, you told a room full of people that Ellie had growing to do. You said the baby might take after me, and that was a relief. Silence. She said, I am simply trying to protect this family. Daniel said, Ellie, this family. It was 8 words. I had waited 2 years to hear them said clearly. She hung up. The clip hit 200,000 views by 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Barbara's book club sent her a group message that afternoon. I know because Pam told me later. 3 members said they'd received calls from people asking if they knew the woman in the video. 1 member had been recognized by her daughter's coworker. The book club's name had appeared in comments on the clip. By Sunday evening, the comments were 140,000 deep. I had not posted anything. I had not commented. I had not responded to a single media request or stranger in my DMs. I was 31 weeks pregnant, sitting on our couch with a heating pad on my lower back, watching the number climb. Daniel sat beside me. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to think about it until tomorrow. He said, okay. That was enough. For that night, it was enough. Sunday night. Daniel was asleep by 10. I stayed up. I sat in the nursery, the room we'd been painting in stages, pale yellow, the same shade as the shower tablecloths, because I'd brought a swatch to June, and she'd matched them accidentally, and we'd both laughed about it. The crib was assembled. The changing table was assembled. The handmade blanket my grandmother had sewn, cream-colored, soft, with the baby's initials embroidered in the corner in pale blue thread, was folded on the shelf above the crib. Barbara had held it in the shower. She'd said, how sweet. Something homemade. 2 words. The same 2 words, with the same specific weight. I sat in the nursery with the blanket in my lap, and I let everything I hadn't let myself feel in 48 hours come up. The tears came without warning, not a collapse, a quiet overflow. I let it happen. I cried because I was 7 months pregnant and exhausted, and I had spent the past 2 days managing a situation I hadn't created. I cried because I had smiled at 42 people while my mother-in-law told them I wasn't good enough for her son in language, just careful enough to claim deniability. I cried because Daniel had needed a viral clip to hear the difference between how she is and what she did, and I had needed him to hear it before now. And then I stopped. I folded the blanket back carefully, the way my grandmother had folded it when she wrapped it. She is 84. She had hand-sewn the initials herself, with her hands that shake now, over 2 weeks, while watching television in the evenings. She'd mailed it without a card because she said, "The blanket is the card." That blanket was the realest thing at that shower. And Barbara had set it aside with 2 words. I sat with that until midnight. Then I went to bed. I had decided what I was going to do. If someone you love ever made something for you by hand, something that took time and care and the specific effort that only love produces, and someone treated it like it was less than it was, I want to hear about it in the comments. Tell me. And now let me tell you what I did on Monday morning. Monday morning, 6:48. The clip had 412,000 views. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop. I did not respond to the clip. I did not post about it. I did not write a statement, a thread, a caption. I did not contact the person who'd shared it, who June had since identified as a mutual acquaintance from a book club peripheral, not Barbara's book club, a different one, who had been in June's private group and had shared the clip because she thought it was important for people to see. What I did was write one email to Barbara. I took 40 minutes to write 3 paragraphs. I read each paragraph 4 times. I removed everything that was performance and kept only what was true. I said, "What you said at our baby shower was harmful. Not because of one line taken out of context, but because of the pattern in which that line was the clearest expression. I am not asking you to agree with me. I am telling you what is true from where I stand." I said, "Daniel and I are building a family. That family includes our son. Whether it includes you is a decision that belongs to Daniel and me, and it will be made based on what we observe going forward, not on what has happened before." I said, "If you would like to have a relationship with your grandchild, the path to that begins with a real conversation. Not a phone message, not a public statement, a real one in person with Daniel present." I sent it at 7:22. Then I closed the laptop. Daniel had read it over my shoulder for the last paragraph. He didn't suggest any changes. He said, "That's exactly right." Barbara did not respond to the email that day. What she did instead, according to Pam, was call 4 members of her book club and describe the email as an ultimatum. She said she was being excluded from her own grandchild's life. She said Ellie had always been difficult. She said she was the victim of a misunderstanding that had been weaponized. She was assembling her version of events. She just didn't know yet that the full 44-minute recording still existed, and that June had not posted it. The consequences fell like dominoes. Each one made a sound. By Tuesday, 3 local news websites had written about the clip. None of them named Barbara. The clip didn't show her face clearly enough, and no one who knew her had publicly identified her. But the comments below each article were full of people who had recognized something in her performance, the specific texture of a certain kind of mother-in-law, and were sharing their own versions. 214,000 views by Tuesday evening. Barbara's church received a phone call on Wednesday from someone who had seen the clip and believed they recognized a woman in the background as a member of the congregation. The church's social media coordinator, Barbara, according to what Daniel found out from his aunt, asked whether the woman in the clip was associated with the church. Barbara denied it. The full 44-minute recording was not posted. June made that decision in consultation with me. We agreed. The 8 seconds told the necessary truth. The full recording was documentation, not content. It would stay with June unless it was needed for something specific. That's an important distinction. The 8 seconds were already in the world. What we controlled was what came next. Daniel called his aunt, his mother's older sister, a woman named Rita, who had known Barbara since childhood, on Thursday. He told her everything. Not the clip. She'd already seen it. Everything else. The book club conversation. Pam's disclosure. The 7 uninvited guests. The email. Rita was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Daniel, your mother has always done this. To everyone she loved. She holds them so tightly they bruise." He said, "I know," she said. "She did it to your father. She did it to me for years. She does it because she's afraid." He said, "I understand why she does it." He paused. He said, "It doesn't mean she gets to do it to Ellie." Rita said, "No, it doesn't." She called Barbara that evening. I don't know what was said. I only know that Barbara called Daniel the following morning and asked if they could meet. Without me. Daniel said, "No. With Ellie or not at all." She agreed. We set a date for the following Saturday. A coffee shop in town. Not her house. Not ours. Neutral ground. I want to stop here and ask you something. What do you think Barbara said when she walked into that coffee shop? Option A, she apologized fully and without conditions. Option B, she said she was misunderstood and wanted to explain. Option C, She cried and made it about her own pain. Drop your answer in the comments. I'll tell you which one it was. If you guessed option C, you know how this works. Barbara arrived at the coffee shop before us. She was already seated when Daniel and I walked in, my hands slightly swollen, my back aching in the way it had been aching for 2 weeks. She looked at me when I sat down, and her eyes went to my stomach first, the way people's eyes do, and something moved across her face that I couldn't entirely classify. Not quite guilt. Not quite grief. Something that was trying to become both and hadn't gotten there yet. She said, "I know you're angry with me." I said, "I'm not angry, Barbara. I'm clear." She blinked. I said, "Anger is about the past. Clarity is about what comes next." "I'm interested in what comes next." She looked at Daniel, then back at me. Then she cried. Not performed crying. Real crying. The kind where your face does things you're not controlling. She said she had been so afraid of losing Daniel, that she'd always been afraid. That she'd never had a good way of handling that fear and had always made it someone else's problem. She said, "I knew when I said it that it wasn't right. The toast." I said it anyway. I said, "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Because I wanted the room to be on my side before they were on yours. And I knew if I waited, they would just be on yours." That was honest. It was the most honest thing she'd said in 2 years. I sat with it. Then I said, "Barbara, our son is going to be born in 2 months. Whether you are part of his life is a real question with a real answer that isn't decided yet. But the path to yes starts with exactly this, saying the true thing instead of the managed thing." She nodded. Daniel put his hand over hers. She looked at him. Something in her face that was very old underneath the performance. A 63-year-old woman who had held her son so tightly for 30 years that she hadn't understood that holding looks different when the person being held becomes someone else's home. We had 3 more of those coffee shop meetings before our son arrived. Each one shorter. Each one is slightly more honest. Each one was building something that was not what I'd imagined, but was real. Our son was born on a Thursday morning at 6:41. He came into the world the way babies do, entirely on his terms, all at once, with no interest in anyone's timeline but his own. He has Daniel's nose and my grandmother's hands. He is, so far, entirely himself. Barbara met him on Saturday. She held him for 40 minutes. She didn't say anything the whole time. Just held him and looked at him and cried quietly. And this time I was certain it wasn't performance. She'd brought a gift. A handmade blanket, cream-colored, soft. She'd taken a knitting class. It had taken her 6 weeks. It wasn't as good as my grandmother's. The stitches were uneven in places where she'd had to start over. She held it out to me before she held the baby. She said, "I saw your grandmother's. I thought he should have one from each of us." I took it from her. Then I handed her the baby. The clip has been viewed 1.4 million times the last time I checked. I stopped checking around the 6-week mark because by then our son had arrived in, to the only number I was tracking was how many hours between feedings. Things I did not do: post a response, write a thread, give an interview, name Barbara publicly, ask June to take down the original clip, try to make the story bigger than it already was. Things I did: sent an email, have 3 coffee sessions, answer Daniel's question on Sunday morning honestly when he asks what I want to do. What I wanted was for my son to have a grandmother who could love him without gripping. I wanted my husband to stop managing his mother's behavior by making it smaller. I wanted a family that told the truth even when the truth was embarrassing. I wanted the handmade blanket on the shelf in the nursery to be treated like what it was, something made by someone who loved us, and not like a symbol of everything I wasn't. None of that required a viral clip. But the viral clip required me to decide who I was going to be inside it. Because here's what I've come to understand. When something happens publicly that involves you, something you didn't plan, didn't post, didn't orchestrate, you still have to decide what you do next. And that decision is the only part that belongs entirely to you. I could have used the footage aggressively. I could have posted the full 44 minutes. I could have named Barbara on every platform that was asking for more context. I could have let the momentum of 400,000 strangers do whatever it wanted to do. I didn't. Not because Barbara deserved protection, but because my son deserved a beginning that wasn't defined by the worst thing that happened before he arrived. Barbara said something in the shower that was wrong. Quietly, carefully, deliberately wrong. And the world saw 8 seconds of it and understood something real. That was already enough. The rest was ours to build. My grandmother's blanket and Barbara's uneven blanket are both in the nursery now. On the same shelf. Side by side. Which is not a metaphor for anything except the fact that I ran out of room, and that's where they fit. My son sleeps under my grandmother's. It was made first, and it's softer. Maybe someday he'll use Barbara's. I don't know yet. That's the honest answer. I'm not interested in the tidy version. I'm interested in the true one. The true one is, we are in progress. All of us. Daniel, who learned that love doesn't mean minimizing someone's harm until it becomes undeniable. Barbara, who learned that a room's allegiance is not the same as a person's trust. I learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to make you smaller in a room full of witnesses is to stay exactly your size. Not bigger, not louder, just exactly what you are. 8 seconds. 400,000 people who had never met me recognized something true in my face. I wasn't sure what they saw at first. Now I think it was just someone refusing to become smaller. That's it. That's all it was. And that, it turns out, is enough. I want to ask you something. Has someone ever tried to make you smaller in a room full of people? And what did you do with your face in that moment? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Type enough if you've been in that room. I want to hear from you. Subscribe and hit the bell. A new story every day. Check the description for more. I'll see you tomorrow.